Hey everybody. I love the evening chorus of the birds, and since the pandemic, the chorus in the garden has changed. It's become more diverse, and there are songs I haven't heard in a long time, maybe a very long time. As a city dweller, there's although we have birds that travel through occasionally, right? They'll stop off here going to other places and I may hear them. The synanthropic birds, the birds that can thrive well with humans, has been a shrinking cohort. And over time, as the city gets busier and more dangerous, their populations move away from the urban areas to other areas where it's easier to survive. The garden is overall pretty safe, though there are a lot of raptors and hawks. But I love the evening chorus of the birds, and the morning chorus. There's something deeply primordial and beautiful and compelling and refreshing, something reminding, as if I'm in a field of truly intelligent signaling that goes back perhaps to the beginnings of life on Earth, but certainly to the beginnings of the forms that could make noises. I was listening earlier to Richard Feynman talk about imagination and science and playing with ideas and playing with really deep questions and being willing to play informally, right? Being willing to really imagine getting all the way in that water, right? And playing in the water of wonder, curiosity, passionate dreams of understanding. And he was talking about the behavior of molecules and things that heat up and balls that bounce and rubber bands that stretch. And really, he was able to immediately transport me into this kind of other universe, I would think. Like, it sounds like another universe. It's not the one I'm viscerally familiar with. And yet, apparently, given what our species has been able to ascertain so far, which I presume to be both true in its scope and provisional in its scope, early days, right? We've had science a pretty short time. He seems to be describing, the phenomenon I'm familiar with of warmth and bouncing and elasticity and electromagnetism and such, which in this he posed as a great mystery, and that's something that I like. I like when the scientists are honest and they say, as Roger Penrose did, when asked if he was a materialist, he said something resembling, yes, with the proviso that we don't know what material is. There's somebody who's careful, right, about believing in the island they're standing on and understanding how, for all we've learned, we sort of don't know the first thing, right? We don't know the thing at the top of the tree from which all other things descend, or that thing which, that origin, right? Not a thing, but we don't have a category that will contain it. I have a word. Whatever we think the everything is, we don't know the first thing. And since we don't know the first thing, we have to invent first things, propose them, right? And before we can do that, we have to imagine them. And so we can imagine useful and astonishing things about the first thing. Things that will help us learn to see in ways that would otherwise be impossible for us during our human lifetime. And Feynman's talk, which I strongly recommend, I think if you just type in Feynman and imagination, you'll probably see it, really fired up my own imagination and curiosity and reminded me of the fertile nest of little question eggs that I've long carried with me about life and time. I don't want to dismiss life, organisms. It's a great place to start. And one of the big, why is there anything is certainly one question. Although once we ask why, perspectival influence will sneak in there, usually unconsciously, and things will get, how to put it, there's there's an inclination to project, kind of, right? The why questions. But what's going on, why is there anything, and what are life forms? What is the nature of life forms? If somebody above the order of life forms, if there's, say, a form of intelligence above those that we understand as locally embodied, right, over them, or under them, either way, right, it doesn't have to be. It could even be encompassing them, right, in a sphere. There's imagination, right? We start out with the flat thing, and that's not satisfying, or we start with a point, right? We go to a line, and then, we add the dimensions, circle, sphere, hypersphere, although we don't have to go there, we could go to manifolds. In any case, life, time. Because the whole speed of light thing is, it's not really clear that that's a speed, even though we've bracketed it that way in our category thinking. And that might be it seems to me there's almost certainly a better position, right, than to think of what light is doing fundamentally, or what it is being, what its nature is, as a velocity. And gosh, it's just so fascinatingly mysterious, right? Light and matter signals in the atmosphere in the evening of the anciently conserved living beings, right? The 2020 version of the origin of life on Earth, connected, in my view, all the way back to that first moment of inception of life, however it may have occurred. Time, dimensionality, the incredible mystery of language itself, the associated mystery of mathematics, deeply associated, and yet exotic in its own right. Intelligence, consciousness, dreaming, love, memory, religion, law, grammar, rhetoric, semantics, phylogeny, evolution, microbiology, cells. I could go on for a long time, but one of the things I want to make very clear is it's as if I'm delineating spokes on a wheel, right, or in a sphere. These are, for me, if I play this way, these are angles that emerge from the fundamental question, right? Or even that way of framing it sets us off on a slightly confused path. I could refer to it as one's worldview, right? Because clearly what one thinks everything is, or the world is, both invests, it already starts the category making process. We have to have at least provisional categories before we can approach, like, what's the world? What is the universe? What's the everything? Yeah. And I call this a couple of different things. The uniphore, right? The one carrier, or the super container, because in terms of sets, right, it's beyond all sets, and yet all sets are within it. I think it's not an ordinary set, though, so I don't think of the super container as a set, but rather as an origin. And that origin could be quite complex and not exist in merely a single category, since, of course, no category does not derive from it. So I was thinking about the evening chorus and being in the intelligence signaling network of living beings, rather than the representational signaling network of my people. And you know, it's our imagination, it gets short shrift in language and culture, even though we glorify its produce and sell the produce, and commodify it and so on. But it's very fundamental to all kinds of things about being human, all kinds of ways of being human. And without a good imagination, we will bypass the portals that have long existed within and all around us. They will be invisible to us, because most of them, to recognize or open those portals, to interact with them as an intelligent being, as a human being, as an animal being, you know, maybe as some other kinds of beings we don't have good words for, or the words we have are really value-laden. But to interact with those portals requires we imagine them. And in case I have to make the point very bluntly. There was some imagining and some portal creation going on when you and I were conceived, right? You better believe there was some imagination involved that got all that together. And it wasn't just one person's imagination, and it wasn't merely the two people who were involved. Nope, it's a big network of imagination that basically it's pretty hard to separate. If we want to look clearly at it, we can't separate it from the network of all of life on Earth, or maybe all of being in eternity. So, our ordinary frame of mind is not only insufficient to recognize the portals within and all around us, it will deprive us of the capacity to relate with them if we're insufficiently imaginative. And this might include having weird fantasies, yeah? Having not ordinary fantasies. The kind of fantasies children have, right? Fantasies like, what if I can talk to the sky? Now, I think the common person would say, well, there's nothing there to hear you. But until my father imagined loving my mother, there was nothing there to love him. And so it occurs to me that, well, it doesn't occur to me, I've long known this, though I was reflecting on it this evening. That actually we're in a really strange position where the nature of our consciousness, the nature of our habitual thought, the ways we are involved with language and its impact on our imagination, what we imagine things to mean and be, and where the distinctions are and where they aren't, and what's ambiguous and what's not. These are all decided for many of us, or at least deeply influenced by language. And I mean, the story is weirder than that. That's just something very superficial I can say that's blatantly obvious to me. So, one thing we can understand is that, or one thing I would ask you to imagine, is that our relationship with opportunities for discovering what we're carrying, both as individuals and as humans, and also as animals and, beings uncategorized, or perhaps souls. See, that's the sound of blue jays engaged with a raptor, a hawk most likely, though it could be an owl at this time, in a nearby tree. But that's the description in language. It's not what's actually going on. What's actually going on is really doesn't fit inside language or concepts, as we all know, because we all have this kind of experience. For example, just tasting food. So it turns out that our imagination and our capacity to employ it skillfully and playfully and creatively, right? We don't want to just imagine wild things that have no real, that masquerade as portals. But we would, I think, like access to the many doorways into being and intelligence that we are born with and that the living world is made of. And it requires imagination. And by the way, I think you can talk to the sky. I mean, fundamentally, it seems to me, though perspective matters in this question, does distinction have precedence or unity? And it looks to me like in the important places where I've been able to get some sense, it's unity that has precedence. But distinction is very compelling. There are people who have experiences with animals and plants and living places that are, in my view, absolutely authentic and certainly transcendental, right? Meaning, like, at a layer of experience, we far beyond what we would commonly think or believe is possible. And there's all kinds of stories about this, and some of them are just made up. But the old mythos of, you know, the nymphs and the fairies and the mermaids and the satyrs and the unicorn and many other glimpses that have come down to us in literature and such, where they may not be referring to explicitly what we suppose they do, particularly as moderns, since we have very little experience, most of us, with this kind of thing. They don't refer to nothing. Those are not mere fantasy, nor are they simply stuff science could shed light on for us so that we would dismiss them. No. But I think one of the things when I was reflecting before I decided to make this video, I was thinking about the question of what's it like for people who don't sense and can't access the profound, infinitely deeply layered intelligence and life presence of plants and animals in living places. What do they think? Do they think it's just molecules and science going on in there? That's all it is? I'll tell you bluntly, there's no portal there. That's a doorless trap, right? It's the end of imagination. Because once you know what it is, you're done. You don't have to imagine it anymore. You can dismiss it and get on with messing around with your smartphone. And see how that works out after a lifetime of it. This living place that encompasses me, made by humans, but nonetheless, you know, profusely alive, magical, mysterious, ancient. Because the ancient beings live here. Now, these trees, the birds I hear, the yellow jackets, the beetles, the flies, the earthworms, the probably trillions of sand fleas that live here. This place has a peculiar, unlikely inhabitant 3 miles from the ocean. Underneath the loam, all throughout the garden, are sand fleas. Lots of them. And not a lot of other decomposers that I found. I mean, you know, sow bugs and slugs and snails and bacteria and earthworms and stuff, sure. But my point was, or where I was going, I realized that it's really easy to fall off the vehicle that leads us to the land of doors, living doors, into that which we are carrying and that which our family here, all of the living beings here, our family, all of them, are carrying together, uniquely. And then when those doors link up, there's no explanation for the kinds of things that happen there. And science will not encompass it. As I've said before, it's quite easy to dismiss what it will never encompass. So there's this other aspect of the situation too, which is, if you're not a bit daring, right? If you're not imaginative, then the plants and animals and living places will seem to you kind of as if they're dead, because you won't really know how to relate with them as beings. And so you'll relate with them primarily as objects. And you might have some, unconscious sense of beauty or something. Oh, this is really a beautiful tree or whatever. But that's far too superficial to be a door. Well, beauty can become a door for sure, if one is deeply enchanted enough. So if we don't sort of become self-enchanted, presuming that we're not just simply born, probably somewhat like I was, with a deep felt sense of, oh, these are alive beings, and the fact that the adults were making other noises and tried to kill most of the things that moved, that just looks like confusion to me. I was like, okay, those adults are really, they can't see, right? That the living beings are living beings. Complete, intelligent, in their own dimension, yeah? In the forms of intelligence appropriate to the way that they're in the world, but also in a really strange way that would require an unusual imagination to picture, right? And I'll have a go at it, even though it'll probably be a little clumsy, just in case I succeed. It might be worth the risk. So if you imagine that there's organisms, we'll call it down here, and the other place could be above or below, or like I said, around, whatever you want, doesn't matter. But so you have organisms down here like me, right? And if you just imagine that I am something a bit like what's on the end of a fishing lure, except that I'm alive and I'm not hurt in the sense of being on a hook or something, right? And there's a string that goes up, we'll pretend it's up for kicks, to another dimension. And in that dimension, there's a very strange bubble, right? Of intelligences, not just my own, but those very closely associated with me, okay? And this bubble has members who aren't present in this time, in this story, right, in my description. And I'm going to pretend that this strange bubble, this multi-bubble up here, constellated bubble, we'll call it my I so don't want to use the regular words here. No. Yeah, that's a better way of doing it. What I think of myself is something that bubble is doing down here in physical reality as a body, and it's intimately linked with my body and my mind and all these things, yeah. And you can think of it as like the upper me, right? And I'm the guy down here in physical reality, and that guy's up there in the origin layer of reality. And what I want to explain is that every single bacteria, every living thing, every virus, every animal, every plant, they have a thing up there, right? They have an upper being, yeah? And these two things, while it might be difficult for me to talk to this branch, right? Although I'm sure it can hear me in a way. What's really going on when I relate with the branch is the upper bubbles are having a conversation. And trust me when I say that the upper bubble of something like a blue jay is fully sophisticated being, right? It has, it's not exactly the same structure or complexity as a human being, but it is essential being, and it is individuated, and it is belonging to many others, right? In family ways and in relational ways. So for me, this way of imagining living beings, all of them, an ant, whatever. Now, you can say, well, go ahead, Darren, try to talk upstairs to the ant and get it to do something other than it would normally do as an ant. And it's a reasonable challenge, but I'm not trying to make a testable framework. However, it's very clear that non-ordinary communication happens between living beings all the time. And sometimes it happens in ways we can easily become conscious of, and we remark upon them. And some of those times, there's a regular explanation, but some of them there isn't, and maybe always there's both. So for me, the living world is like this hyperstructure of intelligence families expressed in, all these peculiar individuated forms that are sort of a symphony together, fundamental syntropy, union. They're making the music of being together, and there's purposive beauty underlying this thing. It's dangerous to point at it directly in language. In a way, it's disrespectful to point at it in language. So profound and overwhelming and ecstatic is this. The actual motivation, or something resembling the actual motivation behind embodied beings and souls and things. So for me, when I'm walking around in a living place, and I'm not always aware of it, sometimes I'm distracted, I'm making a video right now, for example. But there's this incredible sense of both coming home to the origins of my humanity and my mind and my intelligence, because I think we inherit intelligence from the upper, above the personal, from beyond just this body. Intelligence isn't merely something my brain does like a function, though it's involved. And consciousness seems to be peculiarly involved with brains in some ways as well. So I ask you to imagine such things, right? And, we don't have to go out of our minds. We don't have to make religions out of them, but they are useful. Well, the word that I usually use is toys, because we can play with them like lenses, right? And one of the things that I want to ask you to do is to try on some other worldviews, because the ones in popular circulation among the humans are mostly kind of shitty. And the materialistic ones pretty much end all portals. And how will you have a mind? Like, the imagination will starve to death in such a clinical nightmare. Or rather, it's profoundly endangered by such things, I think, generally. There are exceptions. Humans are weird enough that there's all kinds of exceptions. Life is very weird. It's quite exceptional, actually. So, I think the reason imagination gets short shrift is we're concerned, nobody wants to, quote unquote, go out of their mind. And also the superficial culture is so dull and narrow-minded and broken and kind of semi-robotic, right? That anyone who, like, we want to be able to share worldviews and experience and thought and adventure and so on. And if the context is really crushingly dim, which vast portions of ours are, not all of it, we'll mostly probably comply, generally. And there's a certain kind of gravity of the crowd, right? That just by osmosis we sort of absorb and reiterate the zeitgeist, right? The spirit of the time, except it's not spirit these days, it's more the slogan of the time or something, right? Which is not a zeitgeist. There is a spirit of the time underneath the collapse into representations, however. So for the people who cannot or refuse to imagine living beings as intelligent, it seems to me very ironic, because without all of the living beings, we wouldn't be intelligent. And there's another, I'm so glad I remembered this. Okay, so before I wrap up, and I want to wind down a little bit here, but first, let me see if I can get this out there. When we link with other living beings, our imaginations, our human intelligence, our minds, if they enter that dimension and affect it, and we then in turn affect our fellow human beings, right? Then that creature, that plant, that animal, that insect is acting in a new dimension, right? In other words, whether or not they are intelligent, them plus us is more intelligent than just them or just us, right? So when we authentically connect with another living being or a place, a lake, a mountain, the tree, the ocean, then something really profound happens where two universes begin to exchange intimacies in a primordial way. And so it turns out that it's kind of a great tragedy when the humans think of living beings as not beings or just things, because we're both losing out. They can no longer enter through that portal into the dimension of human experience and consciousness and relation and intimacy and wonder and communion, right? They can no longer come in, and nor can we enter the world of the sage plant or the honeybee, right? And these worlds are siblings. They should not be divided. They all go together. I don't want to, austerize the planet and just make goop. No, there's lots of useful distinction and complexity and stuff, right? But that's why that's what makes opening the door such a profound and beautiful experience. And it's pretty easy to tell the difference. Like if you're afraid about going insane or that people are insane, some people go nuts. I've gone nuts. People go nuts. But it's not really that dangerous. We're more likely to go insane if we don't have access to the portals in ourselves and each other and the sky and the sun and the living world and the moon and things we've not yet named, things we've not yet distinguished. Our minds are made for travel in a network we've never dreamt of, and instead we have this crappy thing, mostly crappy, doesn't have to be, but current state, really bad, the internet. So humans don't make representations like that unless there's something within them, right, that's familiar already with something a lot better than that. Yeah. And this is what I'm arguing we should be willing to imagine. Because when we begin to imagine the network of intelligences, ancient, futurial, present, right, as a single family, and the different ways that network is differentiated within its structure and how those differentiations transform under certain circumstances. I guess it was good that I was a network technician for a while, because it changed how I thought a lot about identity and meaning, and what connection means, what disconnection means. And rather than me rendering those things in the image of machines, which I did, of course, at first, eventually I realized, like, oh, this is the crude human derivative representation of what we're made of, right? Except that what we're made of has dimensionalities that are very difficult to picture without a little help, right? Someone to kind of nudge us along and imagine this, right? Imagine that all the human minds are always connected, but the degree of local sensing of that can be inhibited in all kinds of ways, and also avoided, right? All of the living beings on Earth, their essence, right, is always kind of in communion. And underneath that communion is the distinction of each individual being or cell or living place. Of course, are there individual living places? Where do you put the boundaries? It's kind of one big living place, though there's also, this living place. I don't know, humans, we have minds, we make cuts, boundaries. It's important to, actually. Our thinking doesn't work without it, but we can do it better and in ways that we need creative inspiration, right? We have to share this creative inspiration together so that we can recover some of the astonishing nature of our own being while we're alive in this world of swarming with machines and representations. So, the tree I love comes to life in my heart and in my upper bubble. Right? And when I dream, my dreams sometimes include this tree, this bird, this place, this person. And sometimes when I'm awake, my awareness will change. Almost as if something had nudged me, in a very quiet, gentle way. When I was listening to the evening chorus, reveling in just living sound, which can be overwhelming too, right? Go to a jungle. It's serious loud, I have heard. I was reminded that we have to make the portal in a way inside ourselves before we can discover it. And it's helpful to have trustworthy, authentic people who can assist. Yeah? It's also very rare, because I think most of the people who discover the portals, they're inclined to make religions about them and then sell those religions, maybe even online, which is not my goal at all. And I don't think I'm not happy about that, because it's easy to give us kind of junk toys that might not be entirely ineffectual, but there's something wrong with the story about them, right? Let the living beings tell us their story. Yeah. Let's listen instead of talking in this sacred place of communion. Let's listen there. And be very careful about bringing the representational mind, language, descriptions, explanations, to the sacred heart of origin. This might be useful down here. In relation with something true, those very utilitarian habits and prostheses can wreck stuff. It's not to say there should be none, but it's dangerous, and we have to have hygiene about representation of the sacred. Huh? These things don't really go together. It's kind of like talking about kissing someone, right? Except I think it's even more profound, much more. Before we can discover what's going on, we have to be imaginative. And if we're going to accept an off-the-shelf, pre-digested version, well, that's pretty much exit from the game, right? Now you're just going to know what things are. And you'll be able to tell people, imaginative people, even children, you'll just tell them what things are in language. Maybe one day. Not so much of that anymore, huh? Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye for now.